So we've got some amazing people here for the Fireside Chat. We've got our moderator and our hostess with the mostess, Pauline James, founder and CEO over at Anchor HR. We have David Creelman, CEO at Creelman Research. But he's not most famous for that. He's most famous, of course, for recently being on the HR Chat podcast. And we've got Tunde Kolarinwa, VP Talent Management over at some company called Rexall. Have you guys heard of them before? Okay. And the Fireside Chat is called HR Function of the Future. Insight. Sorry, people are talking at the sides there. If you could focus on the fireside now. The session is called HR Function of the Future: Insights-Driven and Adaptive Centre of Innovation. How do people and culture divisions need to adapt their structure, approach and services to ensure that they are equipped to meet the changing needs of employees and the organisation? That's a very long question, so I'm intrigued by the answer. I hope you all are too. We've got about 20 minutes now for the fireside chat, so enjoy. Thank you.
Good. I'm really pleased to have David Creelman, Tunde Kolarinwa with us. David is well known for his research regarding HR. He belongs to numerous think tanks internationally. I encourage you to go check out his bio. It's impressive. And an impressive number of books as well. And Tunde, impressive senior executive.
I'm working on my book.
It may come for help tonight, so make sure you chat with him after and get in the notes. And is the leader as the VP of Talent Management at Rexall. So really appreciate just the perspective you bring as well. So with that, we're going to start by talking about what does it mean to be evidence-based in HR. David, you write extensively about evidence-based HR. I'd like to ask you one thing HR pros can do to be more evidence-based.
Okay, so one thing, it's hard to be evidence-based because it's easier just to go with your gut or what somebody else said or what you heard at an event like this. And so you really have to say, as a matter of personal pride, I'm going to be an evidence-based practitioner. Like, imagine you're a doctor. If you're a doctor, as a matter of professional pride, I'm going to provide the best evidence-based medicine to my clients. And the other side of that is to recognize that, to be realistic, we don't have time to do a big research project. But if we spend even 5 minutes getting the available data or running a little survey or talking to some experts, 5 minutes of being evidence-based is better than not being evidence-based at all. So it starts with that sense of identity and professional pride, and matched with the realism that if you have time to spend hours, spend hours. If you have time to spend minutes, spend minutes.
Thank you. Tunde, how are you challenging yourself and your team to be more evidence-based?
So building on what was just shared, obviously you come to events like this, you hear what everyone's ideas and theories are and so on and so forth, but again, you definitely have to go back and build on the data that you have within your group. So we just embarked on the data journey. And it's important for us as a business, being in the retail space, fast changing and so on and so forth, to be data-centric, but also human-centric. So there's a balance that we always try to manage, in that we leverage the data, but we also understand what the reality is. Because many a time we've heard, well, this is great, but that's not our reality. So we say, you know what, let's hear your reality, and let's combine both, and then come back with some fact-based, evidence-based data and information, and it's done really well for us.
Thank you. We've talked, and there's been a thread that many speakers have pulled on, that many of us have seen through the pandemic and beyond, that many organizations adapted quite well by engaging their employees deeply because they needed to. They had no choice. We had no playbook. We had to involve them. And you hope that we learned that we do gain efficiency. We do have higher engagement with employees. At the same time, we see companies moving back to having their bearings. Are we sliding back to former practices, more top-down project management, more top-down directives? And I see this as a real-life, current example that there's a lot of emotion attached to as well. Decisions around hybrid work. Thou shalt be in the office 3 days a week, regardless of what you're working on, because we believe literally bumping elbows is what drives collaboration. But I think it's also just a real opportunity for us as HR professionals to really practice deeply or challenge ourselves around, we're assuming there's a gap. Is there actually a gap? And if there is a gap around collaboration, for example, how do we solve that? Are we solving it by going back to practices we relied on previously? Are we looking for new and different ways? So I'm going to pull on that theme from two angles with both of you for a moment. And Tunde, I'd like to start by asking you specifically around, you've moved to office as a destination model, very similar to the examples that Jillian gave earlier. How have you been an ambassador for this shift? I know you're like, send me your leaders, right, to talk to about why we need to do things differently.
Yeah, so definitely we're seeing some folks that are, of course, going back to the traditional format. And the thought there is, let's hear from our employees. Let's hear what they're saying. So we run pulse surveys I believe every quarter. And we recently ran one on the effects and the advantages and how people are feeling about office as a destination model, and overwhelmingly came back as very positive. You obviously have some detractors, which we expect, but we were able to further drill down into those groups and understand why exactly you detractors. And one of the things that we found was at the outset of our office as a destination model, a charter was not set. The standards was not set around these are the days we're going to come in, these are the reasons why we're going to come in, and so on and so forth. So we were able to go back to them, leveraging the evidence to say, we think you need to go back and have these conversations with your team and level set appropriately so that folks understand what exactly it is. You also understand what will make it worth your while for them to come into the office as well, and that has helped us tremendously. Even recently, like I just said, we had all operations meeting and so on, which is the first one we've done in almost 3 years, but the enthusiasm was there. But it doesn't mean you're going to see you next week, right? We're going to do it this one time. That's it. Go continue your work, and then we'll come back again at another time.
Thank you. David, the pandemic forced a move to remote work, and it required leaders to be much more focused on outcomes rather than monitoring to lead their teams. In your book, Lead the Work, which actually preceded the pandemic, you talk about the need for organizations to really revisit how they disperse work, how they manage work, and the need to become much more innovative. How do you see this playing out?
Yeah, so Lead the Work I did with the book with a guy called John Boudreau, another Reverend Jason Sasson, both of whom were big heavyweights in HR thought leadership. And there's a lot covered in the book, and I think it's a really interesting book, so here's my sales pitch for the book, Lead the Work. But one of the things we focused on was the idea of talent platforms which enable gig work, right? And so this is, again, well before we were forced to having people work remotely. There were lots of people working remotely, and it was working very well. And so we think we've proven that remote work can work, and we have a lot of experience from the gig economy and how to make it work. And I'm going to share you a couple sort of personal stories where I use the gig economy. One is I had a lot of Excel graphs to produce this on a number of projects. And so I had a gig worker in Malaysia, and I would just send the Excel file, and then it was really like, magic, right? In the morning, I'd have all these graphs, right? And you think, well, I don't care if she's on Facebook. I really care nothing about it. It's a clear results-oriented thing, and it was a great way to get work done. But the other one, somebody says, oh yeah, well that's simple, Excel, very clear output, easy to measure output, right? There was another one where we had no idea of the output. I was building an animation for sort of a little 1-minute commercial, and I was working with a guy in Siberia. He was like, and he hadn't done anything like this before. I'd never done anything like this before. He'd say, well, how are you going to manage that? Well, we don't really know what a good output looks like. So it was like, here, why don't you work on it for a couple of days, and then get back to me, and we'll see where we are. And we'll work another couple of days, get back to me, and see where we are. So the lesson there being that, yes, not everything has a nice, tidy output like the Excel graphs, but there are lots of things we can do. We've had lots of experience, as I say, with gig work and remote work, that you can assess the output, and you don't have to be looking over the shoulder micromanaging.
So I love the idea of us hopefully hanging on to the need to be much more objective around how we set goals, how we support employees in meeting objectives. Tunde, you've spoken about the value of moving to more of a project-based approach in how we lead employees in teams. Can you tell me in a few sentences why you'd like to see this shift?
First off, I've now solved my Excel problem. Just reach out to somebody. That's good. But with the gig economy, with the project-based approach, very similar to what was just shared, is the concept of leveraging people's skills, human skills, which we know is what is more valuable in the workspace, because we know from a technical skill perspective, we can outsource to Siberia and so on and so forth, and people can support us through that. So this is my personal musings, is that I think the workforce will eventually become very project-based, where every search, that's a project. Every learning program that you're creating, that's a project. Every problem that essentially shows up is a project in and of itself. Having, I guess, project pods made up of different individuals who are not necessarily just SMEs in that space. So if I take our company, for example, we have pharmacy services. When we're solving a problem with our pharmacy, everybody in there is a pharmacist. Guess what? A lot of blind spots arise, a lot of tunnel vision and so on and so forth. Let's diversify that group. Let's have various individuals get me in there, right? And see if I can give a different perspective on a pharmacy solution. So having different pods with different individuals that bring a different mindset, a different skill set, a different lens, I think is probably the future, because it'll be time bound. So I have a project that would run for a whole year, but if it's project based, guess what? It's time bound, and it'll probably run for about 2 months, for example. So we know when you have that accelerator of time, efficiencies arise and things get done. So that's my personal musings, coming in my books.
And that sounds, now I want to work for Rexall, because that sounds so much fun to work that way.
To require, not to require employees to report to the office has been a current and key topic, but there is a broader challenge. The idea of being more insights driven as opposed to opinion driven, open to experimentation. And I see sometimes what I would consider a misunderstanding of what it means to be evidence based. Sometimes it's interpreted as being, well, we have to prove the ROI before we do anything, as opposed to being curious, being open to experimentation, being open to iteration, be open to shelving something, right? If it doesn't get the results we want, we've had leaders feel in a lot undertake a lot of paperwork and processes that aren't garnering the impact we're looking for. David, we worked together on a project with the European Union Intellectual Property Office that related to them preparing for AI and increased automation. And I'm hoping you can share a lesson with the audience about experimenting with new technology, emerging technology.
So I'll tell you, so this one's very interesting. So again, it's the European Union Intellectual Property Office, and they deal with things like trademarks. And at a strategic level, they had identified that AI and automation were going to be big deals, right? And good for them, right? So they're not just worried about what's happening this week. They have a strategic plan. But the strategic plan is AI, automation, robots, a lot of big words, transformation. And so you have all this stuff going on up here at this very abstract level. Meanwhile, you've got a big IT team that's doing IT stuff, right? And so there are SAP implementations and some AI projects and so on. And then you have the entire organization, so about 95% of the organization that seems completely detached from this. And so what we did is we had workshops with the actual people working in the different parts of the organization to think about what can they do, like how is this going to impact their actual work, and what kinds of things can they do to start dipping their toe in the water and getting some experience with this. And so it was really exciting to go away from this very abstract thing and getting to people and talking about their work and what that first step is, so that they could then learn from that first step.
Any tips for the audience on what that can look like practically within an organization as you're opening your mind to piloting, I won't steal Tunde's thunder, but AI and recruitment?
Go and answer. Go ahead.
No. You're the guy doing it.
Okay, so right now we are in the process of looking at our HR function and looking at two streams: HR, so specifically employee relations, and recruitment, and implementing AI and seeing how can we leverage some efficiencies there. We obviously started with the problem. So what is the problem? From an HR perspective, ER perspective, we have a lot of transactional requests that come in. How many vacation days do I have left? Can I get an employment letter, and so on and so forth, which is bogging down the HR team. They can't really focus on strategic objectives. On the TA side, it's very much the chasing people to get in their calendar and answering the pre-screen questions that are standard and so on and so forth. So With the HR team, we're in the process of meeting vendors to talk about AI and what that would look like. It's going to be very much a chatbot interaction, which we've launched recently. I think we're about a month in on the recruitment side, where we have conversational AI that we are leveraging. So you go on our website, you start asking some questions there. This is what I want. I want an hourly job. Okay, perfect. Here are the hourly jobs that we have, and so on. So directing individuals to where they need to go. As it evolves, it's going to get to a point where they can actually book their interviews with the recruiter based on their responses on the pre-screen. So that way the recruiter is not chasing the candidate to book interview times. All of a sudden you come in the morning, boom, here you go. Here are all your interviews, right? And you have notes attached to it. So like I said, we're a month in. To date, we're about, I think we've got 18% conversion rate from a click perspective. We're able to tell what days, what times candidates interact with the tool. So in a full day, we have 70% interaction during a work day, which typically a recruiter is busy anyway, so won't be able to interact with that individual. So guess what? The AI is handling that at this time. And then after work hours, so after 5, it's about 30%. Another instance where the recruiter won't be able to interact. So that is also helping keeping the conversation going. And essentially, I've heard this today, and I love it, meeting people where they're at, right? So we're meeting candidates where they're at, and eventually we're going to meet our internal customers, being the employees, where they're at as well.
But I love that as a first step, because you think, well, how are we ever going to get into this whole world of AI? Well, you're getting into it. And after this project, the next, you'll know so much more.
Yeah, 100%.
Thank you. Any insights of things you've learned?
Test, try, fail, learn fast, and keep going. Just keep going. You got to be resilient through all of this, because we don't know what we don't know. And because we don't know what we don't know, it's uncharted space for everyone and anyone. So dip your toe into it. If you're afraid to do it, just do it, right? The worst that can happen is it doesn't work and you try something else, right? So I would just say keep pushing.
Thank you. David, the most powerful financial regulatory agencies have now taken a serious interest in reporting on human capital. In 2 minutes, Could you explain for this audience what they should be thinking about?
And by the way, does everybody know Dave Ulrich? Is that a name you know? You should know. Anyway, many years ago, maybe 15 years ago, he wrote a book saying, hey, investors should be paying more attention to human capital. And so thought leaders like Ulrich, and I was at some conferences for this, people have been talking about reporting on human capital to investors, for 10, 15 years. But it was just the thought leaders, right? Just gurus and making speeches. Anyway, now the Securities and Exchange Commission has come out quite explicitly and said companies should report on human capital if it's material to their business. And we have a hard time imagining why it wouldn't be material to your business, and IFRS, which sets international financial reporting standards, has now taken over the work of setting standards for sustainability reporting, which includes human capital reporting. So what does that all mean to you? Is that we've gone from a world of gurus talking about this to the most important, powerful financial institution in the world saying this needs to be done. So what does this mean? And by the way, this is very, very recent. Like the stuff with IFRS is, just in the past year that this has happened, right? So if you haven't heard much about it, that's why. But at some point, the people in investor relations are going to come to you. And the worst case scenario is they come to you and they say, okay, according to the SEC, we should be doing this. I want you to do this, and this. And you go, wait a minute, I don't, you're not the boss of me. Yes, I am, because this is, and you don't, and you say, but what you're telling us to do is not really helpful. And they, it doesn't matter, I'm telling you what to do. So I'm the accountant, I'm going to tell you how to manage people. So what you want to do is you want to take the initiative in terms of what should we be, let's start gathering the information we want to report on human capital, how are we going to approach this. You'll be, you set up the committee, right? You want the finance people on it, you want the investor relations people on it, but you take the initiative so that you're not just at the table, but you're at the head of the table, taking the lead on this stuff. And there is an ISO standard on this, so if you think, I really don't know where to start by buying the ISO standard, ISO 30414. And that's at least a starting point. And if anybody said, well, what are you reporting? Well, we went with the ISO standard, same as Deutsche Bank. Oh, well, that's a pretty good place to start. That's pretty solid.
Thank you. As we wrap up, I'd like to ask each of you to share one piece of advice you would have for those trying to influence their board, their CEO, leaders to embrace new approaches to work. Tunde?
So for me, it's all about culture. And from a culture perspective, one of the things they need to understand, and what I keep telling folks, is culture evolves naturally, because culture impacts people, and people evolve naturally. From a generational perspective, from me today is different from who I was yesterday, right? So culture evolves naturally, let it evolve naturally. We're not going back to tomorrow, and we don't know what tomorrow is going to bring, so let it just flow, and go with the flow as well.
Yeah, and I think if you're talking to these senior people, make sure you're coming from a point of view of understanding what they want, what the pressures are on them, what their life is like, as opposed to thinking, oh, there are all these things that I want, all these things that I believe in and I care about. Don't start with what you want, start with what they want, and then figure out how you can support what they want.
Thank you. I love how all the themes have tied together. You pulled on one
There
of
we go.
Miranda's key themes as well. Thank you, and thanks to the tremendous